Well, good morning and welcome to our Insider Tips to Acing the Interview with Matt Ford and Rebecca Powers. Our special guest today is Ms. Ghislaine Lespinasse-Bond. All right, let's take a look at how to participate in this webinar. We welcome you. Feel free to take a moment to introduce yourself in our question box down here. If at any point you feel that this window is in your way, this orange rectangle with the white arrow will collapse the window. And then if you click the arrow again, it will restore the window. Everyone is muted today. So if you do have any questions or comments, take full advantage of that question box down here. We will be answering questions throughout the interview. So once any questions arise on your end, feel free to just type those in. Okay, so let's take a look at who we are. Today we have Matt Ford. He is the Program Director for Literacy New Jersey, Gloucester County Programs. Good morning, Matt.
Good morning, Rebecca. How are you?
I am good. How are you today?
I'm as good as can be on a gloomy, rainy day. We're going to try and bring the energy up today.
Excellent, excellent. And myself, I'm Rebecca Powers. I'm the Program Director for Literacy New Jersey, Burlington County Programs. Our special guest today is Ghislaine Lespinasse-Bond. Ms. Bond has over 30 years experience in human resources, where she has directed the activities of employment and training. And she currently volunteers for Dress for Success, where she works with women and minorities to develop their interview skills. She's also a volunteer with Literacy New Jersey, Burlington County Programs. Welcome, Ghislaine.
Good morning. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much for being here, Ghislaine. We look forward to hearing all about your expertise in this area. All right, so let's take a look at our agenda for today. First thing we're going to talk about is preparing for the interview. We'll give you some tips there when the interview actually starts. Then we'll talk about what to do during the interview. And then we'll follow up. What should you do after the interview? And then once you've been offered the job, what do you do now? And then lastly, we'll finish up with some resources. So with that, I will let Matt take over.
Excellent. Thank you, Rebecca. So just to reiterate, all of what we're going to be talking about today pertains to students who have already landed a job interview. So we won't be covering any resume writing skills or anything like that. If you are interested in learning more about writing a resume or all of that type of stuff, Literacy New Jersey and Union County did a fantastic workshop on resume writing that you can check out at our website, literacynj.org. So again, all of what we're going to talk about today is the interview portion of the job search. So let's start with the beginning stages. You've landed a job interview. Now what? So Ghislaine, why don't you talk to us a little bit about how we can prepare for an interview?
Sure. So what I'm going to share with you today will apply whether you're applying for a cashier position at a Target or whether you're applying for a position in the C-suite as an executive. So the steps really are the same no matter what job that you're applying for. So first, you want to research the company and its values. You know, the interviewing process is not only you being interviewed for a job, but you're interviewing the company. So it's important that your values align with the company's values. So for example, if community service is something that's important to you, you will want to work for a company that also those values align with yours. So, which is why the research is so important. And also the research is beyond just what you read, on their website or what you might read in news articles, but you want to talk to people who currently work for the company, because you could glean a lot from what happens in the company from there. Glassdoor is another resource you can use to research a company, but there's nothing more powerful than someone who currently works there who can share their experiences with you and really tell you what goes on behind the scenes at a company. So, which is why the research is so important, so that you're making a decision that aligns with who you are and you're going to ultimately be happy at that company. But the next thing you want to do is make sure that you're reading the job description so that you understand the job and the skills that are going to be needed to do that job. Because during the interview, you want to be able to speak to it. So you want to make sure that you're very familiar with the job and that you're going to be able to use some of that information that you've read in the job description as you answer your questions further down the line as we get to that point. And then I can't stress enough the importance of practicing. There are some typical questions that are asked in interviews, and you can research, online, you can find a plethora of questions that typically get asked. So you want to identify some of those and prepare some answers ahead of time so that there is less, blank time while you're in an interview trying to think about an answer. And also, it kind of makes it much smoother, especially with questions that are going to be asked that might be trickier. For example, if you've been fired from a job, as an interviewer, I go through every job that you've had to understand what the job was and why you left or why you got fired. So if you got fired for something that's not so good, you have to have a prepared answer that makes it sound better than what it is. And I don't mean lying, but kind of structuring the answer to make it come across a little bit more positive than it might have been. Because if I say to you, why did you get fired at a company? And you say, well, I stole money. Right then and there, as an interviewer, that tells me that I'm not going to interview you. I'm not going to hire you for the job. So you have to find a way of framing the answer in a way that's more palatable to the person interviewing you. And then you also want to have some examples. I typically have done what they call behavioral interviews, which is asking you about, give me an example of a time when you have. So you have to have examples of things that you can relate to me. So if you're applying for a customer service job, I will say to you, tell me an example of when you provided great customer service. And I'm looking for you to explain to me what the situation was, what you did to resolve it, and how did the customer feel on the way out. So those are called behavioral interviews, which is what you've actually done, versus situational interviews, which is when the interviewer says, tell me about it, tell me what you would do under the circumstance, which is much different. Because we know as interviewers that there's no better predictor of future behavior than past behavior. So if you provided great customer service to a customer before, and you can demonstrate that to me, I know that you know how to handle a customer and provide a good customer experience. And then you want to, have a friend of yours help you do a mock interview. So you kind of practice, the types of questions that are going to be asked, go up with answers, and practice all the things that you're going to need as you do the interview. You might want to have your references ready if the interviewer asks for them at the end of the interview, which sometimes they do, and let your references know that they might get a call. So they're not caught cold, not knowing that you had provided their name and number as a reference. Now, from a legal point of view, companies are not allowed to give references. So they can't say that you got fired, for example. They could say that you worked at a company, and they could say that, the dates that you worked, but that's really the extent of what they will provide. And the reason for that is that companies have been sued in the past for defamation of character. So over time, they've decided that this is all they're going to give. So if the references have worked at the company, it's very important that they know they're going to be getting in a call, so that, again, they're not being caught cold. You want to plan out what you're going to be wearing the day of the interview. Set out your clothes, make sure they're ironed and clean and presentable. Now, this will apply whether it's an in-person interview or whether it's being considered being done over online or on the web. Many companies now will do the first interview via web, so that it takes less time. They're not having you come there and as a way of screening people. And more now, because of COVID, all of the interviewing is happening online. So it's important that people dress appropriately, not thinking because online I can, not look the part, because you want to make a good impression from the very start. So so that your clothing, whether it's in person or not, you want to dress professionally and be prepared for the interview. Again, if you're at home, make sure that your surroundings are appropriate for an interview, that there's nothing crazy going on. I was, when I was still working, I was doing a meeting with a colleague, and they were doing it from home. And as they were in the meeting, their spouse walked by not wearing any clothes. So that could be problematic. So again, you want to plan out, you want to be in a private place and dress professionally. If you're going for an in-person interview, you want to make sure that you know how much time is going to take you to get there. A dry run ahead of time might make sense. If you're going during rush hour, you want to allow additional time for those things that could happen during rush hour, so that you arrive on time. So now, following the pre-interview tips, you want to arrive 15 to 20 minutes early, and that's with allowing time for things that could happen. And you never know when you're going to an interview whether things are going to work out okay, because every morning you turn on the news, there's a car accident, there's a backup, so you have to allow yourself enough time to get there, to be on time for the interview. And on time is being early. And once you arrive, you want to take, once you've arrived there and you've gotten there on time, you take a deep breath and kind of calm yourself down, because there's a lot of nerves that come along with doing an interview. So kind of take a deep breath to calm yourself down. And something that people don't realize, that really the interview could start as early as the parking lot, because you never know who you're interacting with as you're entering the campus of the company that you're coming to interview with. So you want to greet everyone and smile. The receptionist, if you're going to a company where there's a receptionist that you're going to be meeting with to announce you, you want to make sure that you're friendly and you have a smile and you're greeting the person appropriately, and you're not being rude to anyone that you come in contact with. Before you go into an interview, you want to make sure that you silence your phone, because you don't want your phone to be going off during the interview. Now, there happens to be a situation where you might have an emergency call during the interview. You would want the interviewer to know, that you're aware of proper phone etiquette, to let them know, hey, I'm expecting a call, because is it okay if I leave my phone on? And the interviewer would, for the most part, tell you it's okay to have it on. But you want to make sure, if any case, that you've muted your phone or turned it off so it's not going off during the interview. You want to make sure that you have copies of your resume, so that if you have an updated copy, or you're meeting with multiple people that day, that they all have a copy of your resume. You want to have a notepad and pen. You want to take notes as the interviewer is sharing things with you, so that you're able to refer back to the notes from time to time, and kind of make connections to how your background could fit into something that they said. Because the whole point of when you're being interviewed is that you want to stand out in a good way. There are so many people that are coming to be interviewed, and after a while, if as an interviewer, if you have a lot of people scheduled in one day, they could kind of blend together. So if you don't stand out, you become part of the group that's been blended together, and you won't get a call back. So, which is why you want to make sure that you're connecting what the person is saying. If it's active listening, that you're listening to what the interviewer is saying and being able to refer back to what they said. And as we know, stuff happens. So you're on your way to the interview, and there's an accident, and the roadway that you're on is shut down. Now, that's beyond your control. You've done everything that you could to get there early, but this has happened. So as soon as this happens, you want to call and explain to the interviewer what is going on, because then that person can perhaps reschedule you for a later time that day or for another day. But it's very important, because as an interviewer, we schedule our time to meet with you, and we could have other things going on after the interview with you. So if you don't call, and then you don't show up at all, you've already lost the job. Or if you call after the time that the interview was scheduled for, that's not respecting my time. So that, as an interviewer, that's something that would have me not even refer you further on. So as emergencies arise, make sure you're calling. Now, it's possible that the emergency is such that you can't call, right? So you're dressed for the interview on that day, and you fall down the steps and you break your ankle and you rush to the emergency room. So in that kind of situation, you're not going to have the ability to call the interview ahead of time. So then at the soonest as you can, you call and say, hey, this is what happened. But the important thing is that you're reaching out and letting people know what's going on, so that you're sure that you're respecting their time.
Excellent. Very, very good advice for the pre-interview. And as staff and as tutors, I just want to reiterate to everybody, this is the stage where we can be the most help to our students, right? So this is the stage where we can help them in everything that Shislin was saying. We can help them research the job. We can help them pick out what they're going to wear. We can help them set up their technology if they're doing an online interview. So as we go forward, I want everyone to be thinking about, what can you do as a tutor? What can you do as a staff member to help your students with all of these things that Shislin is saying? Because they're all super important, and there's all something we can contribute to our students' success. So let's talk about during the interview. So now we've prepared ourselves, we're ready to walk in. Shislin, talk to us a little bit about what we're going to do now.
Sure. So now you've made it past the front desk, and you're now sitting down with the person who's going to interview. You want to make sure that you're listening to what they're saying. Oftentimes, I've had situations where I've asked a question and the person is not listening, or they're answering something I didn't answer. I didn't ask. So that tells me that you weren't listening attentively to what I was asking you, because you're like on a different, on a different page. You want to show interest, and with body language like nodding, smiling. So that tells me that you're hearing what I'm saying, and you're showing some interest. By the same time, you don't want to seem desperate when you're interviewing, because that says there's something in the background there that's making you that desperate. So you don't beg for a job. You say, I'm interested in the job, and from what you're saying, it sounds very interesting. I would love to work here. That's enough. You don't need to say, I've been out of work for 6 months. I really need this job. Please give me this job. That's not something that, as an interviewer, that we're really wanting to hear. So you want to kind of keep it showing interest without being desperate. And you want to be as honest as possible with your answers. I mentioned earlier that if you've been fired from a job for stealing, it could be tricky to be truthful about that. So how do you couch that answer with being truthful, but at the same time not knocking yourself out of the interviewing process? So that's something that you, again, with practice, you kind of learn how to answer appropriately that way. You want to tie your skills and experience to the job. So it really ties back to the job description that I talked about. So if you're applying for a job that requires customer service, you would tie back to, hey, if you see in my job at Target, I did X, Y, and Z. So that's tying your previous experience to what is being called for in the current job. And you want to do that as much as possible, so that the interviewer knows that you understand the job that you're applying for, and you understand how that ties to your background. So you're going to help make those connections. You want to be concise and stay focused. You don't want to ramble on. It goes back to being attentive and listening to the question. You're listening to the question and focus your answer to what's being asked, and not ramble on. Many times people are nervous and they're not quite sure what to say, so they begin to ramble, and they're all over the place and not really focusing on the question. Now, if you're not fully understanding what the question is, it's okay to ask them to repeat the question, but you want to make sure that you're staying focused and answering what is being asked of you, and also not oversharing. because sometimes the rambling creates oversharing, which takes you down this, down this path that you really didn't need to go, and really oversharing information. I had, employment law, something that I really always interested me. So I've got a certification in employment law. And legally, as an interviewer, I cannot ask you whether you're pregnant or whether you plan on having a child. But I've had interviewees overshare and tell me all that. That's not something that as an interviewer, I want to know or need to know. So that goes back to people just rambling and oversharing and just giving too much information. You want to listen to the question and answer what you're being asked. You want to stay true to yourself and be positive, because I mentioned that the interviewing process is, you're sharing back and forth. And the whole positivity piece is that, I've had, I was doing an interview not long ago. I was actually doing a mock interview with Rest for Success. And I was helping somebody with the process, and I asked them, why did you leave this last job? And the person's response was, my boss was horrible. I hated working with him. Well, I don't want to hear that as an interviewer, because it's possible that this boss was really horrible, but it's also very possible that you weren't doing your job, so your boss was giving you feedback and holding you to task, and you had an issue with that. So it's not, my boss was horrible. It's like, well, I really wanted to pursue a different avenue or something to that extent. But you don't want to dwell on the negative pieces. Or it could be, something happened I really wasn't happy with, but I felt it was better if I did that. Or it was an opportunity for me to learn something differently. That's why I went to this other company. So you want to, again, maintain this positive attitude and not bash anyone that you had previously worked with. You could ask follow-up questions if again, something is unclear. You can always ask the interviewer to further explain, or to get more information. Again, you're trying to get information from the company about the job, because it's possible that after hearing about the job, you decide it's not the right thing for you. So if you don't fully understand the job, then it's hard for you to make a decision as to whether the job is the right job for you. So, which is why the follow-up questions are important. You want to be mindful of the time. Again, goes back to the rambling. Answer the questions precisely. The interviewer might have scheduled 30 minutes for an interview, an hour for an interview, and they might have a bank of questions that they're going to trying to get through. And then as an interviewer, I would ask the same questions to every applicant that I meet with, so that if I'm not able to get through all my questions with you, then it makes it difficult for me to compare the candidates if I don't have a full picture of who you are. So again, stick to the question, answer the questions, and be mindful of the time that you're using. As an interviewer, if I want more information, I'll ask a follow-up question if I don't think you've answered enough. So you kind of gauge that. Again, practicing also helps when you practice ahead of time prior to the interview. You want to showcase how your knowledge and the company values are aligned. As I mentioned, if customer service is the #1 priority for the company, you want to relate it to where you've provided great customer service before. It's important during the interview that you showcase your skills, because there are times that interviewers don't do a good job of interviewing, and they don't ask you all the questions that are pertinent to the job that you're applying for. So it behooves you as an interviewee to make sure that you're getting that out there. So if you're seeing that things are kind of winding down and you haven't really fully explained how your skills tie to the job, you want to make sure that you're getting that out there as much as possible. And I mentioned before behavioral and situational interviews questions. Some people just do behavioral, some will do behavioral and situational. So you want to know the differences between those two types of questions and be able to use those skills.
So Giselle, it looks like we have a question from the chat box. So Rebecca, would you want to share that with us?
Sure. We have a question from Lori. She asks, what suggestions do you have for someone who is changing careers?
Well, first, I think the person has to understand the career that they're looking to switch to. What are the skills that are required? And how can the skills that they have from the previous job, how they could pertain to the new career? Oftentimes it might require having to take a step back to switch careers. For example, if someone who's been a teacher, for X number of years, and they're looking to transition into working in a training department in a corporate level, for example. So you want to be able to demonstrate that what you've done as a teacher, how they could apply the teaching skills, how those teaching skills will apply in a new environment. And as I said, it might mean that because you don't have the right experience, you might have to take a step back to acquire those additional skills to be able to go forward. So it's really understanding the job, the new career that you're trying to get into. What are the skills that are required for that? How do I get those skills? And really, have I done other things outside of work that can pertain to that skill? So if you're doing volunteer work, for example, there are skills that you use doing the volunteer work, and do those skills apply to the new career you're trying to get into? So as an interviewer, you want to demonstrate to me as much as possible how your previous skills tie to this new career that you're trying to get into.
Very good. Very good information. Thank you, Ghislaine. So just like we did with the pre-interview tips, let's talk about some tips that we can share with our students during the interview.
Okay. So body language is very important. And, most interviewers know that there are some cultural norms that dictate whether someone will look at you doing an interview. There are some people that won't even shake your hand. I mean, I remember one time I was interviewing someone for a job, and they came. I extended my hand, and they didn't shake my hand. And I found out afterwards that culturally, as a man, that he wasn't able to shake my hand because I was a woman. So it's important to understand those things when they happen, but ordinarily, body language is very important. Looking at the interviewer, not slouching the interview, keeping, maintaining your posture, not, twiddling your fingers, which is why it's important. If you have a pad and pen, then your hands are being used, so you're not nervously, kind of moving them around. But posture, looking directly at the interviewer, and smiling from time to time, nodding your head, these are all things that are important during the interview process. I mentioned taking notes. That's a way of, keeping your hands occupied. You're writing down some pertinent things that you want to tie back to the interview. You're also taking notes that you're going to be using post-interview to when you thank the people that you met with. You want to be yourself, be comfortable. Don't try to be something that you're not. And you want to be very observant of what's going on during the whole process. But body language is super important during the whole thing.
Excellent, excellent. And this is the stage where I feel like our students are going to be the most nervous when they walk in for the interview. So like Ghislaine was saying, this is the best time. The best thing we can do for our students is to do these mock interviews and to have them pay attention to all of these things that Ghislaine just said, and to help them coach them on all of these things so that when they walk into the interview, they're less nervous. So before we move into the post-interview stages, it looks like we have another question. Rebecca, would you like to share with us?
Yes, so we have a question from Henry, and as Ghislaine, you were talking about culture, his question is, how do I get an idea of company culture if I don't know anyone in the company or don't have the time?
Well, you can always look at the company website. Most companies, if you go on their website, they'll post what their core values are. So that, without even talking to anyone, you could just look to see what are their core values, what do they stand for, and as they state them on their website, and that will kind of give you a feel for the company.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, websites are always a very great way to get to know sort of what a company is about. Okay, so now we've moved into the stage where we've finished our interview, and as staff, as tutors, this is the part where we can offer the most moral support and encouragement for our students. So let's talk about what we want to do after the interview. Shislem, what do we got?
Sure. So again, doing the whole interview process, you want to stand out. So you've prepared for the interview, you've gone through the interview, now you're done with the interview process, and you've left the company. You've gone home. You want to make sure that you're sending a personalized note. Now, depending on the day, you might have met with one person, you could have had multiple interviews, it varies. So you want to make sure that you're taking notes with each interview, and that you're sending an email to each person that you met with, and you want to tie in what you discussed during that person's interview, so that the person knows that you were listening to me, because everyone cares about themselves, because what I say is so important, that you were listening to me and that you understood the job and you were able to tie in what I said with what your skills are. So that type of a thing will make you stand out in the interview, in the interview process. If you're sending personalized notes to each person you met with, tie in the conversation that you've had with that person. For example, it could be, during the time, we talked about the importance of customer service. And as I said, this is what I've done from that perspective. Or if you felt that you weren't able to give enough examples during the interview, you have an opportunity now that you've gone home and you're less nervous to say, hey, this is something that I did that I think I want to highlight to you. So it's kind of giving you another bite at that apple if you weren't able to come up with an answer initially when you were in front of the person. So those personalized notes, again, will make you stand out, and you're able to give additional information so that the interviewer can make a decision about you as a candidate. I talked about projecting what was discussed in the interview, which is part of that note. You want to make sure your references know that they may get a call about your candidacy for the position. You want to maintain a positive attitude during that time, and really, you can really continue to get more information about the company after that process, because again, the interview process is a two-way process. The company is trying to find out about you, they're trying to find out about the company. So you can continue to do that even post interview. And you can kind of think back about what you did well and what you could have done better, because oftentimes you leave an interview like, oh no, I should have said this or I should have said that, and how did I behave? During the interview, I was twirling my pen. Oh, that wasn't good. So you want to identify those things so that the next time that to keep those things in check. So which is why the reflecting on the interview is helpful. And then there's some interviewers who will give you that kind of feedback about how you did if they reach out for you for a second interview. So it's important, if that happens, that you get that feedback from the interviewer as well.
Yeah, and I want to stress to everybody the first and the last of these bullet points. This is where we can really help our students as staff, as tutors. So you can help them draft this personalized note if they're not sure what to say, or if they're not sure how to word it, or if there's a language barrier there. That's a great project that you can do during your tutoring sessions. And also having a conversation with your students about what they did well, what they think they did well in the interview, what they think they could have done better on. It's easy for us to get down on ourselves when we think we didn't do that well in an interview. But having that conversation with your students might make them say, hey, maybe I did really well in this interview. I could just tweak a few things next time. So being there for that moral support in this stage is really beneficial. We wanted to include some things on what we could do when you've been offered a job, because we understand that this is also sort of a gray area for our students. So Giselle, why don't you talk to us about some things that our students can do once they receive a job offer?
Sure. So you've been successful and you get a call and you're being offered the position. You want to make sure that you fully understand what the expectations are. What is the job? What am I going to be doing? Don't be afraid to negotiate the salary, because again, depending on the job, there's a salary range. So if they offer you something that's lower than what you were expecting, it's okay to kind of, you know, ask for more. It's just about how you ask for that. You know, you don't say, oh, you're offering me, I'm going to fix an hourly job. You offer me $20 an hour. I thought I was going to make 25. You would say, is there any room for negotiation on that? You know, and the interviewer might say, well, what were you expecting? You would say, well, I was expecting something, you know, closer to X. So it's really how you ask for the money is important, but it's okay to try to negotiate some additional dollars if your experience warrants that, and an interviewer would be fine with that. Now, there's some jobs where the money is the money, and you're told up front, this is what the starting wage is, and that's all you're going to make. And so you know that up front. But you also know the jobs where there could be room for negotiation, especially if you have prior experience that this interviewer or the company is really looking for. The interviewer should also, you know, the person who made you the job offer, it could be the recruiter that you met with, or it could be the hiring manager. They're going to ask you to bring in necessary paperwork to fill out the I-9 form to be hired. So you want to make sure that you're bringing that into on your first day. You'll be given some, when you get there, some manuals that you read about, you know, the processes and procedures of the company. Most companies will do, you know, an orientation on your first day. Some companies it's a day, some companies it takes a full week. And all that is really to really share with you what their philosophy is, what are the processes, what are the procedures, what are their policies. You know, they'll tell you up front what they expect you to wear to work, what the expectations are around that. What you wear the first day might not be what you wear for the rest of the time there. So you want to make sure that you're doing that process, doing this orientation process, that you fully understand what the expectations are from the company. And some companies will have what they call probationary periods. That this is a time where they're basically checking you out to see whether they've made a good hiring decision. So you want to make sure that you're understanding all the policies and following through on everything that is required of you, you know, as you're there. You know, almost all jobs require you to do some kind of training during that time. So you want to make sure that you're completing all the training on time, whether it's some online training or in-person training, that you're submitting whatever written work might be required, that, you know, if you're paired with a coworker who's training you, make sure that you're asking questions and you're doing everything that they're trying to teach you. And don't be afraid to ask questions. You know, there's nothing wrong when you're learning. The expectation is that you are going to ask questions. So don't think, well, you know, I'm afraid, I don't know if I shouldn't ask that question. No, if you don't know, it's better to ask and know up front as opposed to assuming and going down the wrong path. You want to get to know your coworkers, and because you can get a lot of information from them. It also makes it a much warmer team environment when you're, you know, getting to know people. You know, for the most part, the people that've been with the company for a long time will, you know, most likely will reach out to you and try to make you feel welcome. But if that's not happening, it's okay to go up to people and introduce yourself. I'm new. I want to know more about the company. You know, someone to have lunch with. You know, if the boss does a good job, they should really be pairing the new employee with someone who's going to have lunch with them, so they're not sitting in an area by themselves eating lunch. So, but it's a two-way process. You have to also put yourself out there. You want to ask feedback from the boss. You're going through the training and you're learning new things, and you would expect that the boss would give you feedback. But if that doesn't happen, it's important to understand, you know, this is what, am I doing this right? What can I be doing better? Because again, especially during that initial period that you're being evaluated, you want to make sure that you're doing everything the right way and learning and fixing things that you can fix during that process. Now, once you've been at the company for a period of time and you understand the job and you're doing a good job at it and you've got that feedback, you want to volunteer to do other things. Because the more you learn about a company and what they do and you're able to do it, the more valuable you become to that company. So really looking beyond, once you've mastered your job, looking beyond this is my job, this is what my job description is. What else can I learn? How else can I contribute? What else can I offer up? Because it helps you in your current job, but also if you have, if you would like to progress with that company and move up, you're demonstrating to the employer that you have an interest in the company and you want to learn more because you want to get ahead. And even from a perspective of companies are, in the current market with unemployment, a lot of companies having to lay off employees because they're not doing the business. And as a person who has to make that hiring decision, I want someone who's going to remain on my team who I can use to do a whole bunch of different things. So if I'm going to make a decision between the person who just wants to do their job versus someone who will do their job but then has volunteered for other projects, will go fill in somewhere else or do whatever, that's that person that I'm going to keep. So it's really you do that for a couple of reasons. Once because you want to learn more and you want to advance, but also it creates some job security the more you know and the more that you're able to do for a company. And you also want to make sure that you're giving yourself time to learn and adjust. Because I think oftentimes people start a job and they get frustrated because on day one, they don't know everything. Well, the expectation is not that you're going to know everything. Your employer knows, your boss knows that you're learning. So they're going to allow you time to adjust and get to know. And they basically have an idea of how long it takes a typical person to master that job. So they don't have unrealistic expectations. So don't put those on yourself. You just need to stay the course, keep learning, keep asking questions, getting the feedback and improving on those things that you can improve on to do your best job.
That's absolutely incredible advice. And I think we all put a lot of pressure on ourselves to master something right away or to be the best at something right away. And I think that's a really great place to sort of end the conversation there before we talk about resources. One thing I do want to add to everybody is just be kind to yourself, be kind to your students, encourage them to be kind to themselves. If they go on an interview and they don't receive the job, it's not because they're terrible. Make sure they know that. There's a role for everybody in the world and there's a job for everybody in the world. And eventually, our students' talents will align with where they're supposed to be. So encourage them to keep applying, keep interviewing. You get better and better each time. And eventually they'll find their niche. So let's talk about resources before we wrap up for today. I wanted to include the 3 sort of major job search websites, CareerBuilder, Indeed, and Glass. They all have fantastic sections on their websites about interview tips and how to prepare for the interview, what to do during the interview. So it's sort of a written, expanded version of everything that Shisan was saying today. We also have our NJ Career Connections website, which is our state website for the job search. They also have a very great section on interview skills with some videos that you can watch and some tips for you to take away today. Also, YouTube has some very great and highly entertaining videos of good, bad, and interviews. I linked one today. If you can click on that link, it's a very great example of what's out there. But if you just go to YouTube and search good interviews or bad interviews, the one I linked has very bad interviews, which is very entertaining. And as Shisan can attest, there are some very bad interviews out there. So it will teach you what not to do on a job interview. Shisan, do you have any resources or anything that you want to share with anybody, places they can go to look before we wrap up?
It's important. I mean, I don't know whether you've covered this in previous webinars, but it's important, depending on the job, that someone has a LinkedIn profile.
Yes, yes.
Have you covered that before?
We have not. So talk to everybody a little bit about what LinkedIn is and what the importance of that is.
Okay. So LinkedIn is, I guess it's professional social media, if you will, where someone is able to create a profile of their background experience, basically, brief synopsis of their resume that's out there, along with a picture, and some other, skills or experiences that they've had that companies use to search for hires. So if I'm looking to hire a customer service manager, so all companies have LinkedIn as a site that they use for searching for candidates. So I would go on to LinkedIn as an employer and search under people with customer service skills, and then profiles pop up with people who have those skills. So I'm able to then zero in on each of the candidates and review their background on LinkedIn before I even reach out to them. So it's a way for employers to search for candidates before even having to post for a job on a website or on Indeed, and identify candidates. So it's important, depending on the job, to have a LinkedIn profile, because even we call passive interviewees, people who are not looking for a job, at times the recruiter might reach out and say, hey, I see you have this background. This company is looking for someone with that background, and they're paying X. You're like, well, okay. I'll go there. So yeah, so a LinkedIn profile is important to have, to keep it. It's, again, professional social media, so that your people know about who you are, what your background is, and what you're capable of doing. Now, it's, again, I'll touch on something that I know that you might have touched on before, is that when a recruiter posts a job, and people apply on their ATS, the applicant tracking system, in the olden days when I started in recruiting, I would post for a job and I would get resumes that would be mailed into me, by the hundreds. And I would have to go through the resumes to select candidates. Now, with applicant tracking systems, recruiters, once the resumes come in, they're doing what they call keyword searches. So if a job requires customer service skills, I can just go in there and type in customer service skills, and it's only going to pop up the candidates who have those skills. So, which is why it's important at times, depending on the job that you're applying for, that you really tailor your resume to that job. And it's okay to have multiple resumes, depending on the skills that you're trying to highlight. But those key searches have become the way that recruiters search for candidates. So if I have a candidate, if I have 15 skills that I'm looking for, I'm going to select the candidates who have the most of those skills that I'm going to bring in. So if somebody has 3 of the 15 versus someone who has 10 of the 15, well, the one who has 10 of the 15 is who I'm going to look at. Versus when I started in recruiting, I would look at resumes, and on paper, there are times that I would have a feeling about a candidate. I'm like, well, I'm going to give them a shot anyway. Well, you don't have that anymore with ATS, because it's all keyword searches and everything has been computerized. So you don't have that as much of that human element.
Very good point. Very, very good point. And I think, the beauty of where we are today technologically is that we can change our resumes quickly and easily to tailor the job, like Ghislaine was saying. So that's a really great project to take on with your students. If they're applying for jobs and they have yet to receive an interview, help them tweak their resume a little bit if need be. Also, creating a LinkedIn profile is a really, really great project for you to take on as tutors, as staff with your students. Because I like to think of it as Indeed meets Facebook. It is a combination of the two. So it's social media, but like Ghislaine was saying, social media for a professional setting. So creating a LinkedIn profile, if you have one, showing your student how to do that. If you don't have one, creating one together is a fun project for you to do with your students. There's a lot of great projects that you can take on in your tutoring sessions if getting a job is a really big goal for your student. There's a lot of great things that you can do together. And I hope that as the webinar progressed today, that you sort of sparked some interest in some creative projects that you guys can do together with your students.
If I could say something about social media, there are companies that beyond LinkedIn, that as they're considering candidates, they look at their social media.
Yes. Very good
So
point.
they might look you up on Facebook or Instagram or whatever to see what kind of person you are, what you're saying. It's especially important now in the environment that we're in, with people having a heightened sense of diversity, and the types of people that are out there. So as an employer, if diversity and inclusion is important to me, I want to make sure that I'm hiring people who are like-minded. So if I'm interviewing someone and I look at their Facebook and they're posting things that I perceive as being racist, I would not be bringing that person in or hiring that person. So what you post out on social media not only affects you personally, but it affects you in terms of professionally, in terms of looking for a job. So Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all these social media sites are all places where potentially you could have something out there that impedes you from getting a job.
Excellent, excellent point. And that's a very, very important conversation that we want to be having with our students throughout this process is be careful of what you post on social media. Ask them, is there anything on your social media that you wouldn't want an employer to see? Because like Ghislaine said, they may be looking at that. When I was younger, I had a coworker that was fired for something she put on Twitter. So make sure that make sure that you're having that conversation with your students throughout this. Rebecca, do we have any comments or questions or anything you'd like to say before we wrap up for the day?
No, we're all caught up on questions. Thanks, Matt.
Awesome. Awesome.
So we'd just like to thank Ghislaine for your expertise today and your service to our community, to our students, as we support their success in finding a job. Thank you to you for joining us today as we looked at some great insights into the interviewing process. This webinar has been recorded, so you can expect that recording within the next few days, along with the slide deck. So thank you very much for joining us today, and have a wonderful day.
You too. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Ghislaine.
Thank you, Ghislaine.